All right, well, my clock shows we just rolled over to the top of the hour. So again, I would like to welcome everyone this afternoon or late morning on the West Coast and in Arizona to part one of our webinar on virtual and hybrid meetings, presented in partnership with our partners at Attune. We're really glad to see you here today. We've had a little bit of a pause for about a week and a half at Unique Venues on our webinar series while we kind of reset and reframed what we were doing for the next wave. I know you're all here because you saw our programming announcements about the upcoming series in June and July. So again, thank you to everyone for the turnout today, and we look forward to seeing you at all three parts of this very important webinar series that we're presenting. I'm going to go ahead and very quickly talk about how things are going to roll today. As usual, all of you that are participants will remain on mute throughout the webinar, so you don't need to worry about background noise or anything disrupting the presentation. But what that does mean is if you want to submit a question for the panelists, you'll need to do so in the Q&A dialog box. So if you hit that button on your Zoom dashboard that says Q&A, you can go ahead and type in a question. Other participants can upvote or downvote those questions so we can prioritize them. I anticipate there might be a bunch today. We are going to kind of roll through the presentation today for the most part and then do the Q&A at the end. So the prioritization will probably be very important. Please use the Q&A for questions about the subject matter. If you have other things that you want to talk about or just mention, that's what the chat box is for. So Allison Salem is here, our Director of Marketing. She's monitoring the chat box and will help engage over there. So if you've got other comments or questions for the group, feel free to throw them there. And as has been our practice, we will run a few polls today. We have one specific to venues, one specific to planners, and we'll run our session evaluation at the end. So that's the format for today. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jerry Neri from Attune to introduce the rest of the team and kick us off.
Okay, thank you, Joel, and thanks to everyone for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us today. To start, I'd like to introduce the speakers today, starting with Joel Hoff from Unique Venues, who most of you know, and Joel will be conducting the polls and managing the Q&A for today's event. Next is Matt Linden. Matt is a senior account executive with Attune and is coming to us from his home in the suburbs of Chicago. Matt draws on decades of consulting experience and specializes in helping organizations to leverage technology to deliver virtual or hybrid meetings and events. Next is myself, Jerry Neri. I'm broadcasting to you from my home office on the East Coast in Princeton, New Jersey, and I'm Vice President of Sales at Attune and have been working to help clients from several industries and businesses, helping to become more efficient. I would like now to introduce you to Attune. Attune is a global leader in event delivery solutions, including venues, virtual attendance platforms, cloud-based labs, and event planning management. Attune has the resources and expertise to execute a total event delivery for clients of any size located anywhere around the world. Whether you're planning a one-day meeting or a year-long training rollout, Attune can help build a comprehensive plan for your event. After the webinar, I invite you to learn more about Attune at attune.com. We have a full agenda today, and I would like to run through the topics we have planned. First, we'll touch on the current environment and the notable changes that have taken place in our lives, and specifically how it relates to event delivery and gatherings in general. Next, we'll talk about moving forward from live to virtual, the three modes of event delivery as we see them, and examples where each method applies. We will then discuss event agendas, the different ways events can be configured, and the flexibility you have to meet the requirements of your event and the expectations of your audience. Followed by the various delivery types such as webinars, virtual and hybrid meetings and events, and virtual training. Next, we will cover delivery considerations, the things you will want to pay attention to, and the requirements in order to get started. Following delivery considerations, we'll present two current case studies where we've been able to help clients continue their events in our current environment. Next, we will summarize the key takeaways from today's session, and finally, we'll open it up to questions and answers at the end. So let's get started. The current crisis has changed the way we think about everything, our lives, our families, how we behave and what we do, and more importantly, what we're not able to do given the current environment. Just a short time ago, the term social distancing did not even exist, and we went about our lives in a very carefree and unconcerned fashion. All that has changed, and now we think constantly about avoiding gatherings, keeping our distance, and keeping our hands clean and sanitized. Whatever the outcome, the future will look different, especially regarding how we meet and interact and gather socially and professionally. As it relates to meetings, there seems to be some easing of restrictions with gatherings of 10 people or less now allowed in most states. As it relates to event planning, companies have been thinking about how to implement virtual delivery for some time. The thinking has now accelerated into action, and some organizations are already delivering a portion of their meetings virtually, while others are still trying to figure it out. Today, we're going to talk about the journey of migrating from a live event to a virtual event, and Matt Linden will take us on that journey and provide some insight on getting started, including the requirements and best practices to ensure a successful event. Turning it over to you, Matt.
Okay, thank you, Jerry, and thank you, Joel. And once again, thank you all for joining us here today. So again, just to kind of recap, the plan is to discuss various formats of delivering meetings and events. So go ahead and get started. All right, we'll begin by addressing the traditional format of hosting live in-person events and also discussing some of the issues that I'm sure you've all faced over the past several months, whether you are a planner or if you represent a meeting venue. Then we'll discuss the transition from in-person to virtual, as well as what it takes to combine these two modalities to deliver what many refer to as hybrid events. And we'll talk a bit about the benefits and the limitations of each of those formats. From there, we'll provide some real-world examples of agenda and event formats before we cover some of the important items you'll need to consider before making the transition to a virtual event delivery. So let's go ahead and begin by defining these modalities by talking about what I'm sure is a very familiar topic to all of you. So again, whether you're an event planner or if you are responsible for managing a venue, we're all familiar with traditional in-person events held at a physical location. It's pretty easy to identify the benefits of a live in-person event. Gathering in the same place allows us to shake hands with each other and to use all your senses to experience your surroundings. A two-way conversation is natural, whether between individuals or in the context of an open discussion. And of course, collaborative group work is as simple as sliding chairs around a room. But geography can be a limitation for these types of events. Attending an event in person is easy enough for people that live locally, but those living further away would of course have to travel. And when that comes to people coming from other cities, this can obviously mean added costs of flights or hotel stays and potentially extended time away from home or from their office. And even people that live within driving distance would have to deal with public transportation or fight traffic and then find a place to park. And now, of course, in the midst of a public health crisis, which is forcing us to practice social distancing, gathering together in a confined space is relatively difficult, if not impossible. Therefore, we need to consider alternative methods of gathering together or for delivering content. Which brings us to the flip side of that coin, or hosting fully virtual events utilizing collaboration technology to bring presenters and attendees together remotely. There are quite a few platforms available on the market to accomplish this, such as Zoom or WebEx or GoToMeeting and many others. And most of these are capable of disseminating content through screen sharing. Now, but choosing the right platform should be dictated by the nature of your content. If it's purely informational or if it's shorter in duration, for example, a webinar format like we're utilizing here today might be your best option. But if your event requires more collaboration or discussion, then you want to consider a platform more conducive to two-way video and audio between your attendees and your presenters or panelists. Now, the main benefit of virtual, of course, is accessibility. Instead of being restricted by geography, anyone with an internet connection can attend a virtual event, especially with most laptops and mobile devices these days incorporating built-in cameras and microphones. Now, that said, there are limitations to this. For example, some of your more we'll say experienced presenters, may be hesitant when it comes to adopting new technologies. Also, some of these platforms fall a bit short when it comes to replicating a live in-person experience at a physical venue. Obviously, you can't shake hands with the person you're speaking to over a video call. And it's also a bit difficult to offer food or other perks to your virtual attendees. But finally, technical support or lack thereof can be a major hurdle for virtual events. It's critical that you have a plan in place to support both your presenters as well as your audience, as issues are inevitable when it comes to incorporating technology. However, due to the current crisis, we're seeing that many organizations that have up until now sort of been putting it off are now being forced to take a serious look at converting to virtual delivery of their meetings and events. And as Jerry mentioned earlier, it's actually very possible that the situation we're all in right now can have long-lasting effects that change our way of life and of doing business moving forward. Now, that said, there is a way to draw from the advantages of both of these two models by essentially blending them together. By adding a virtual component to your live in-person events, your attendees, or in some cases even your presenters or maybe guest speakers, have the option to join your event remotely. Now, over the past several years of supporting hybrid events, Attune has even seen some anecdotal evidence that combining virtual and in-person attendees actually promotes higher satisfaction scores than either fully virtual or even fully on-site events. If done the right way, you can create a fully immersive blended environment that allows on-site and remote attendees to absorb the same content as well as collaborate together in group discussions. Now, given the current circumstances, as I mentioned, everyone's trying to scramble to find a way to deliver their events using a virtual format. But there's also quite a bit of talk throughout the industry that hybrid will play a major factor in the future. Offering the option for your future events to either attend in person or virtually could actually help to bolster registrations while we experience this ramp-up period. Now, with that, I'd like to provide some examples of some of the unique ways that we've actually seen some of our clients leverage virtual formats for their events, beginning with changes to your typical agendas. Now, the main point that I wanted to drive home here is that implementing a virtual format allows you the flexibility to play with your agenda. For example, since your attendees no longer have to physically come to a venue, you now have the option to offer your content in smaller pieces. Perhaps breaking up what would normally take a full 8-hour day and now offering it across smaller 1 to 2 hour segments, for example. Likewise, if your event would typically consist of several topics spanning multiple days, you can now spread your sessions out over a longer duration. This may be advisable, particularly if your content is more technical in nature or it requires a high level of focus, as it can become difficult to keep a fully virtual audience engaged for an entire 8-hour day, or especially for multiple days. While you may have opted to, I guess, we'll say cram your content into a 3-day window, for example, in consideration of traveling attendees in the past, you now have the opportunity to partition your content across an agenda that is more easily digestible. Plus, your attendees now have the option to pick and choose the segments that they're most interested in attending. All right, from there, I do want to talk a bit about your options when it comes to choosing a delivery model that makes the most sense for your event, beginning with the format we're using as we speak. Now, it seems that just about everyone these days is offering some sort of webinar content in an attempt to engage their audience or customers, largely because they're relatively simple to execute and they can be brought together on relatively short notice. Now, but what are the best use cases for this format? Webinars are typically best leveraged as a one-way flow of information to a larger audience, kind of like we have here today. And while you can facilitate a panel discussion or even engage your audience with poll questions or a public chat, the format isn't typically designed to incorporate a whole lot of discussion between your presenters and the audience. Because of this, webinars are typically designed to be shorter in duration. Keeping a faceless audience engaged for 30 to 60 minutes is one thing, but expecting individuals to stare at a PowerPoint slide deck for a full 8 hours is a bit much. Instead, webinars should be used to provide content in small, digestible pieces. Like I said, you can still engage your audience through chat or even gather some data through polling, But keep in mind that your audience is likely dealing with any number of distractions and is not exactly being held accountable. Still, the format works quite well for a variety of use cases. For internal meetings like all company town halls or educational or awareness events, to external customer-facing programs like marketing promotions or product demonstrations, for example. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, virtual technology can also be used to deliver the same content that would normally be offered in a physical venue. And many organizations have been scrambling to find a way to make this conversion. Since these events are typically longer in duration, it's better to limit the size of your audience to whatever makes sense for your content and whatever your normal limit would have been for an in-person event. While you might be inclined to increase your registration capacity, since technically speaking, there are fewer physical space restrictions, you still want to be sure that your presenter is able to engage the audience as much as they normally would in person, just to ensure that your attendees come away with a positive experience that meets their expectations. And if your content is more complex or you're planning to schedule longer sessions, maintaining a smaller audience and incorporating discussions goes a long way to help keep attendees engaged. And as referenced in the moniker or the name, these collaboration platforms typically offer tools or functionality to accomplish this, allowing collaboration not only between your presenter and your attendees, but also between attendees themselves. Most platforms, for example, offer options like private breakout sessions or for small group discussions, as well as a way to engage your audience for Q&A sessions. Now, speaking of engagement, I just want to take a moment to mention a tool that may be of interest to any of you that are responsible for coordinating training events, especially events that require access to computers for your attendees. This can include sessions like CRM training for sales teams or any other software-based training, whether internal corporate training or customer-facing. So these hands-on computer-based sessions don't need to be postponed or canceled. They can still be delivered virtually. Combined with a platform like Zoom or WebEx, a virtual lab solution can essentially replicate a physical computer classroom, but in this case for virtual training as opposed to on-site training. Now, if that's something that is of interest to you, please feel free to reach out to us after our webinar today. We'd be happy to schedule a private consultation for any of you, and as well as a demonstration of our virtual computer lab solution and answer any questions you might have about that. Okay, so getting back to the main topic, what are some of the more important items to consider when deciding on an approach to an all virtual or a hybrid event delivery? First, how large is your audience? As I mentioned before, are you looking to disseminate information to a large group of people, say 30 plus? If so, a webinar format may be your best option, where again, communication flows in one direction from facilitators to audience, without much back and forth between the two. Now, if your content is more interactive and is typically offered to a smaller audience, a two-way platform is a better choice, especially if your presenter is accustomed to leading interactive discussions, or if your content calls for working in small groups. Again, you want all of your attendees to be able to hear and see each other in order to better replicate a live in-person environment. Also, how proficient are your presenters when it comes to utilizing technology? And keep in mind, how much support will they need in order to accomplish that? This might influence your decision-making process when choosing a platform, especially as you consider the ramp-up phase to get them comfortable with the tools they'll be using to conduct their presentations. Also, do you have a backup plan in place? Backup plans are critical for anything with the technology. So many meeting venues will offer a backup or a redundant internet connection in the event that one service provider goes down. Now, in the absence of this option, or if your presenter is connecting from their home or their own private office, having a mobile hotspot ready just in case can also be a lifesaver. Now, you clearly don't want to make this your primary connection option, as wired internet connections are the most reliable, but a hotspot can at least bridge the gap should something happen to your main internet connection. And finally, as a last resort, most of these collaboration platforms do offer a dial-in by phone option in order to join a meeting or an event. That said, while this allows you to listen in or even speak to the other attendees, you won't be able to see any video or materials being presented, nor would you be able to share those yourself if you're dialed in over phone, clearly. Now, finally, you want to ensure that your presenter is outfitted with the right hardware in order to produce a high-quality professional presentation. This also includes not just sufficient bandwidth to run a video meeting, but also think about investing in some higher quality audio and video equipment. Now, before making the jump to virtual, it's important to evaluate your content as well to make sure that it's suitable for a virtual delivery. Although these platforms are designed for collaboration, some events simply just require an in-person presence. The example I've been giving quite a bit lately is if a nursing student is trying to learn anatomy, they can do so using e-learning tools or even virtual instruction. But it can be a bit difficult to replicate sticking a needle into a vein if you're not in the same room with someone else. So that's just a simple example there. But now, assuming your content does translate, next you need to purchase a collaboration platform. This typically includes buying at least a license, if not multiple licenses, for virtual meeting rooms. And then again, determining how you'll support those rooms during your live events. Next, as I referenced before, consider investing in some peripheral equipment, especially if you're planning to offer virtual events on a long-term basis. Now, a presenter's laptop with their built-in web camera can get the job done temporarily, but high-definition cameras and microphones will help to produce a more professional product especially if your attendees are paying to be there. Also, most people don't think about this, but a larger monitor for your presenter, or even multiple monitors, will help to enable a better view of the virtual attendees, which can go a long way in replicating that physical venue experience for the presenter themselves. Again, it's hard to see if someone's nodding off or if they're not paying attention if you can't see their face on screen. Now, once you've built your solution, I've said this a few times now, but it is very important, so I'm going to stress it. You really need to think about support. Again, not only for your presenter themselves, but also for the people that are dialing into your event. As I alluded to earlier, some presenters are less tech savvy than others. So again, you want to make sure that they're comfortable with any tech they'll be using before they have to use it live. For example, Attune, whenever we're hosting a virtual event, we make sure that the presenter or instructor is able to get their hands on the equipment in advance of their actual event. So just so that they're familiar and they're comfortable with the platform. Also, you don't want your presenters acting as tech support during your events. The last thing you want is an entire event being held up for one person that can't get their camera to work. Instead, you want to have some sort of live or online support in place for those virtual attendees. And finally, again, just to reiterate this, you want to establish a backup plan in case your platform has problems, or if your presenter or attendees have issues connecting to the internet or experience an outage. Okay, with that, I'm going to hand it back to Jerry, who will provide some real-world examples of some of our clients that have leveraged collaboration tools to support some of their events. Jerry?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Now I would like to present two current examples where clients have benefited from a virtual attendance solution. The first is the Center for Professional Advancement, or CFPA. As an organization, CFPA provides accredited technical training and continuing education worldwide. Their challenge was that CFPA had been hosting their events in person, with some attendees participating virtually at one of Attune's partner locations in New Jersey. With the advent of the coronavirus, the venue was mandated by the state of New Jersey to close its doors, and CFPA was faced with a decision to continue or cancel their events. The solution was to work with Attune to implement an all-virtual event where all participants, including the presenter, were remote. Elements of the solution included full virtual licensing for the presenter and all attendees, support link listing requirements and connectivity testing procedures for remote participants, full technical support pre-event and during the event, and finally, training for the presenter on teaching a class virtually. The benefits for CFPA are what you see listed here. CFPA was able to run the event on schedule seamlessly and without having to cancel. They were able to retain their revenue stream, so no loss in revenue. Attendees were pleased that the event was not canceled and reported a high level of satisfaction, as you could see from the attendee quote listed here on the slide. CFPA is now more prepared with an alternative should another crisis arise. And finally, CFPA maintained their positive reputation in the industry by continuing operations in a time of crisis. Next up is Transforming Data with Intelligence, or TDWI, a division of 1105 Media. Their business is to provide individuals and teams with technical education and research. They use a variety of modalities, including on-site education, as well as public conferences and seminars. Their challenge was to continue operating in a pandemic environment where government ordinances were mandating restrictions. In addition, TDWI started receiving a number of cancellations and refund requests from customers that had registered for their public seminars. TDWI was faced with the potential of losing substantial revenue, so they needed a viable solution quickly. The solution was to leverage Attune's virtual attendance platform to deliver training to a virtual audience. This option allowed presenters to teach from an Attune center and utilize professional venue and high-tech audio and video equipment to deliver the event. Participants were connected to the event remotely and could interact with both fellow participants and the presenter. TDWI did not have to invest in expensive equipment or licenses or worry about technical setup or connectivity issues. The benefits for TDWI included, as you see here, was their ability to conduct the event without canceling, so again, no loss in revenue. They were also able to satisfy their clients' needs, as the clients did not want to see the events canceled. And finally, the event worked out so well that they want to leverage virtual attendance in the future in order to expand to wider audiences and maximize their ROI. Now to summarize and provide some key takeaways from today's session. The current crisis has changed the way we think and behave and interact with each other, including our clients. Virtual event delivery is becoming more popular. Many large companies, for example, Salesforce and Google, have transitioned their live conferences to digital. The way we see it, there are two paths that you can take regarding a solution: to build or to partner. If you decide to build, here are some of the requirements and things you will want to consider. As Matt mentioned earlier, you'll need to think about platform licensing, high quality audio and video equipment, connectivity and bandwidth testing, event support before and during the event, and of course, presenter training. If you decide to partner, you'll want to choose an organization that has the infrastructure in place and has a successful track record of delivering virtual events. Should you want to hear more or see a demonstration of Attune's virtual capabilities, please reach out to us after today's session and we'll be happy to assist. I'll turn it back over to Joel, who would open things up for questions. Back to you, Joel.
Sounds good. And thanks for sharing all this great information today. So we've got several questions that are out there. Let's just go ahead and tackle the one that's, I know, on a lot of people's minds first, which is talk a little bit about pricing. How do you price this stuff? How do you figure out what to charge someone for a virtual event? Is there a formula or a standard way of doing that? Or what's your answer to that question?
Yeah, Matt, I could pick that one up. Yeah, just regarding pricing, that will vary quite a bit depending on the event. Whether the number of attendees, the technology used, the communication platform. So there were a lot of variables that would go into the pricing out of an individual event. It's not really kind of a price sheet that you could send to a client. What we typically do is engage with a client to really understand what they're looking to achieve, whether they want us to do registration as an example, and what tasks they would like to take on their own. So it is really difficult to come up with a price, but basically it's kind of what you want to include in the event, and that really determines or drives the price. So if you have a particular case in mind, yeah, please give us a call and we can kind of work through that and see what the charges might be.
Yeah, if I could add to that, the one major variable in all of this is actually like expertise or like technical support for your events, which is kind of why, to Jerry's point, it really is hard to give you a solid answer. It really depends on how complex your event is, how many like moving parts are going on in the background, and how many people you need to support that. So that really kind of does play a major factor.
Yeah, no, I can really relate. I was on a demo last week of a different product that, again, the question was asked and they said, sure, it's anywhere between $3,000 and $250,000 depending on what you need us to do. And so again, I think that's definitely something for people to consider as they think through all of this. We got a great compliment today on that. The audio on our webinar is very clear. So it's a good Zoom day and we're all doing well where we're at. But a couple people have asked questions about AV equipment. What kinds of peripheral equipment do you recommend for microphones and speakers and things like that? I mean, again, some of us are just using our Apple, standard iPod things that came with, and others have headsets. And talk a little bit about how you kind of spec out and decide what's the right stuff for a speaker to have, a presenter to have, and for like the room or the production facility to have.
Sure. So I can kind of start with that. So again, I hate to keep saying this, but it really kind of depends on what your format's going to look like and exactly what you're trying to accomplish. Just give you some examples though. So, I mean, for example, like right now I'm in my home office, so the equipment I'll use is different than what you would use in a large meeting space if you were having a hybrid event, for example. But I mean, I'm using a Jabra brand puck to speak to. So basically it acts like a speakerphone essentially. So what we found that this is great audio quality, both for speakers and for microphone. Now, if you have remote attendees, it's great to have them on headsets if they can, so that kind of negates some of the external noise or distractions in the background. But again, it really, and as far as presenting from a meeting space, Attune, for example, in our meeting rooms, we provide lapel microphones for the presenters to wear while they're walking around the room. But we also provide microphones within the room to collect the audio from the attendees in the classroom or in the meeting room. The reason for that is that you want to make sure that if I'm dialing in virtually, if someone in the room asks a question, I want to hear that question so that I can get both sides of the conversation and I'm not only hearing the presenter while they're speaking. So definitely something to think about in terms of audio capabilities. As far as video goes, cameras, there's a whole wide array or range of cameras and quality in terms of like cheap to high quality. For your meeting venues, I would suggest some sort of camera that has pan and zoom function. Now, whether or not you utilize something with like auto or audio tracking capabilities, or speaker track as it's sometimes called, can depend on if your speaker or presenters in the room themselves or if they're in a room full of people. You don't want the camera bouncing around to whoever's talking if there's a lot of conversation going on. So that's something to keep in mind. But again, I guess long answer short, it really kind of depends on your situation and exactly what you're looking to put together there.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, Matt, to what you've been saying. A lot of folks will think that just popping a camera on top of a laptop and actually conducting an event that way will work. And that, like Matt said, is fine for a session like today. That's a webinar. But if you're really looking to whatever your budget would allow, of course you get some diminishing returns if you get your equipment is at the higher end. But you want to, with regards to cameras, having some pan and zoom capability is certainly a good a good idea to have. So it is it kind of really depends on the budget, but that is where you want to invest probably the most is in the AV equipment, because that's what people are going to see, the remote attendees.
Right. And one more thought I wanted to add that just came to mind actually is lighting. Lighting is actually pretty critical whenever you're on camera, obviously. And now you don't have to invest in super expensive lighting rigs unless you're running a really high-end event, like a high-end production. But even for like your remote attendees, for example, suggest that they put the lighting in front of them as opposed to behind them. If you're backlit, it washes out the image. Depending on how dark it is, you might look like a shadow on screen, like you're an anonymous witness in a murder case or something. So yeah, you want to make sure that the light, you consider at least like think about the lighting before you execute your event, and make sure that it looks good on camera before you move forward. So now the other thing I want to add, I think we're going to talk about this a bit in our next webinar, if I'm not mistaken, about the execution. So if you have more questions or if you're interested in more, I would suggest maybe joining us next week.
Okay, great. So a couple of questions have also come up about staffing. So can you talk a little bit about kind of what are the different staff needs that help with the production, and what are they, again, we're going to talk a little bit more about this next time, but just generally kind of what does staffing look like for running a virtual or hybrid event? How many people and what kinds of investment of time do they make?
Yeah, another great question. So again, keep going back to this, but it really depends on how complex your event is. But at very minimum, I would say, it's a good idea to have a support person for your presenter, even someone that's like addressing kind of like the online Q&A or the chat, much like Allison and Joel are doing here today, to kind of help facilitate the virtual attendees, especially if you have like a hybrid event going on and your presenter is worried about an in-person audience. Having that secondary person that's sort of live, sort of an assistant presenter, if you will, goes a long way to help kind of keep that flow and keep those virtual attendees engaged. Now, as far as support goes, and we mentioned that quite a few times, it's critical to have, especially if you're doing this for the first time or if you have attendees that aren't accustomed to utilizing like a virtual collaboration platform, giving them access to some sort of live support, whether it's through an email or like a ticket posting format, or even like a phone call, to have someone they can reach out to help them get set up is a critically important thing to make sure that everything goes off successfully, that you don't have issues. And again, I mentioned this earlier in my piece. You don't want the person presenting to be the one that has to troubleshoot if someone does have an issue, especially for your smaller groups. We've kind of seen that go wrong quite a few times in the past, where if I'm presenting and someone's trying to dial in and I stop everything to try and address that one person's issue, it could take 15, 20 minutes of everyone just sitting there and dead silence. So yeah, you want to make sure you have that support in place, and then maybe an assistant presenter or even like a producer sort of person.
Got it. And okay, so another question has come up from several people about, how do you create this as a service or as a product to entice planners to come and use your venue? So a lot of people obviously are venues that are considering getting into this business or ramping up this business if they're only doing it on a small schedule. So how do you get yourself out there? How do you represent yourself in the marketplace to attract planners or other groups in to hold meetings, virtual and hybrid meetings at your facility?
Jerry, you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. I would just say with events like this that we're teaming up with the unique venues today to actually get that word out. Now, if you think about it, it's just not too long ago, virtual did not play a large role in the conducting events, right? It's become much more popular. Recently, we happen to have been delivering virtual for a number of years because clients were asking to deliver kind of hybrid sessions before. So we started with the technology quite some time, but the way we really productize it or to evangelize, what we're doing is really through events like this, and actually word of mouth as well. Because we have about 600 customers annually that use our service, so a lot of them now are coming to us saying, "Hey, we can't we can't go to a live event. What can you do to help us out?" So it really is kind of getting the word out through sessions like this is the way we're able to do that. And if you're a venue owner, one of the thoughts is maybe we could support the venue owners out there that might need help in delivering that event virtually through maybe one of our centers, or fully virtual, where even the instructor and all the audience is remote. So if you have a particular case in mind, please reach out to us, and we'll try and help as much as we can, because it really is becoming quite, the whole virtual topic is becoming, quite popular today, given, the recent environment.
Great. Some questions have come in about the platforms themselves. So someone's noted that some places won't allow Zoom because there's still concerns about security. Although I think they've probably done a good job of addressing a lot of it. It's that perception still out there. So what are some of the meeting platforms that are out there that are available, and what are the pros and cons of them, just very quickly?
Yeah, so I mean, there's so many. I mean, there's like Skype, GoToMeeting, like Microsoft Teams. Like Google has their own platform. To be honest, I mean, for the most part, like the nuts and bolts are relatively similar for most of these platforms. Some of them have some additional features that you might be able to leverage that might justify an additional like expenditure on those. But really, for the most part, a lot of them kind of, I mean, as long as you have quality video and quality audio coming across. I mean, that's really what you're looking to essentially to accomplish. Now, that said, one thing to evaluate, and I apologize, I'm not the technical expert on this, but some platforms are a little bit more bandwidth intensive than others. I mean, for example, we partner with Zoom as an organization. So, we've seen a lot of the bad press, justified or not, going on out right now in the world. And as Joel mentioned, I think they've really addressed those concerns quite adequately. But Zoom itself is very minimal in terms of bandwidth requirements. So maybe evaluating that or asking the service provider that question would be an important thing to ask when you go out and you're assessing which option to go with.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on the use of Zoom. It is actually the backbone of our platform as well, and we're very aware of the press recently that's occurred with Zoom, and in a lot of cases, we feel it wasn't all that warranted because the security is already built into Zoom. It's a matter of the folks actually using the tool, taking advantage of those security features. So just to kind of put it in perspective, Zoom went from 10 million licenses in 1 week to 200 million the next week. So the volume of their licensing just really exploded, and we're really impressed that nothing happened with the platform itself. It didn't crash. So we're very very highly complimentary of Zoom in the way they've been able to conduct that. But as you know, there has been that press out there with folks entering sessions that they would not normally been able to assess. But and we have a whole list of features or considerations that we have for security around the platform, password encryption, as an example, so that folks that aren't authorized to get into that session can't get in. So we feel comfortable in our use of Zoom for that platform, but we are aware of that, a lot of that press, out there. And I think a lot of it was because there are so many users that started using the platform and didn't know kind of those features. So, but it kind of, they got kind of tainted in the press.
Yeah, and I think we've seen a similar experience here. We've used it and used it really well and not really had any problems. And in the beginning, before they got version 5 pushed out, there definitely were some holes, but I think they're doing a good job. And it's going to take some sectors like the government a little while to catch up with the fact that some of those things have evolved. I know we're getting close on time here. I'm going to launch the session evaluation so that if people do have to drop off, they're going to be able to do that. So I just launched that. If you take a minute before you go to fill that out, we appreciate your feedback and that sort of thing. We'll probably run a little bit over here today. I know we won't get to all questions, and we've had so many great questions coming in. So thank you to everyone. We're going to keep going with a few more and wrap ourselves up here in maybe another 5 or 7 minutes, if that's okay with our presenters. So I had a couple questions come in about certifications for running digital and hybrid meetings. So one person was asking about either a digital event strategist certification or a virtual event and meeting management program. Wondering what you might recommend, or are there other certifications out there that someone could go through some training and some education to kind of certify themselves as being able to run these meetings really well?
So I personally, I've been seeing a lot of things popping up lately about like classes you could take or certifications you could take. I can't name any off the top of my head, unfortunately. I apologize for that. To be honest, our team kind of built our service from the ground. So really, our guys are really experienced and they kind of know like ins and outs, and they've kind of, having supported so many events, they kind of went through their own certification process of, you know, answering questions as they came up and figuring out solutions. Unfortunately, I don't have any specific you know, courses you could take, or I don't know, Jerry, if you're familiar with anything that.
Yeah, I'm really not. And again, it's for many, it's kind of a new topic. My guess is in conducting meetings virtually. My guess is time goes forward, there will be some things emerging that will be a certification class, or at least kind of best practices, you know, out there for delivering virtually. But I think that will follow, again, given the newness of the topic.
Yeah.
So
You know,
in that interim, we're trying to kind of get the word out there that it is possible to kind of run these events virtually.
Yeah, so I was just pinged by a colleague who's actually watching today, and she said that MPI does offer a course as well as PCMA, so might be a good source to look into. I don't have the names of the courses themselves, but you can at least do a little research and possibly find something within one of those two organizations.
Yeah, I think this does continue to be an evolving field, and as such, I think people are scrambling to try to catch up out there. So I'd also caution people just to be careful about the things you might see coming in on Facebook or Twitter or wherever promoting that I'd check them out carefully before you pay some money to sign up for something that may or may not actually deliver what it is that you're working on out there. We're going to do two more questions here. One question comes back around to engagement. Again, we're going to talk about this more in parts 2 and part 3, but just really quickly talk a little bit about how do you foster real-time collaboration with attendees that are both on-site and remotely? Like, what are 2 or 3 of the key things that you have to think about in order to create that engagement with that audience?
This is critical, especially when you're doing fully virtual events, and especially if your presenter or your speakers are not accustomed to utilizing that format. It takes a little bit of getting used to, but that said, the technologies themselves are pretty much built to be pretty user-friendly. So there's a curve for sure, but in most cases, at least from what we've seen, the curve is relatively short. But as far as like maintaining focus and attention of your virtual attendees, asking poll questions is a good way to keep them engaged. Now, if your audience is small enough, incorporating those group discussions I mentioned earlier is the best thing you can do to replicate a physical experience. If they feel like they're a part of the conversation, that goes a long way to help them stay engaged and make sure they're paying attention so that they can, take part in that discussion. One of the things we do, for example, is like, we actually, depending on the size of the audience, when we're hosting hybrid events, the virtual attendees are on screen in the back of the room, almost as if they're in the back row. And that helps the presenter to almost keep eye contact with them because they're looking at their face just like the people in the room. But it also helps to make sure that they remember that, I have virtual attendees watching right now, so that they're not just solely focused on the people in the room. It's a constant reminder that you have people watching you on camera as well. And just maybe providing some guidance for your presenters to, pause every now and then to directly address those virtual attendees, to ask questions to them directly. There's a variety of things you can do to kind of maintain that engagement.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, Matt, it also depends on whether you're talking about a hybrid event where there is some level of participation in the room and others that are participating remotely, or a fully virtual event. You want to give some thought to that as well. But in terms of engagement, the philosophy there is you don't want to treat a remote attendee any differently than you treat an in-class attendee. So you want to try and engage them in the same way, like Matt mentioned earlier, about asking questions, having quizzes, polls, things like that that might keep them engaged, because it is easy to kind of drift off if you're remote. A little harder to do if you're part of a hybrid session and you're in that room for the event. But I think you really want to think about that, because that is an important consideration, because you don't want to lose that percentage of your audience, be it 25 or 50% or whatever, from engaging. So you want to keep asking them questions and calling on them just like you would in a kind of a classroom setting, to keep them keep the attention. And as Matt mentioned, we have the screens in the back of the room with large pictures, so you could see if they're kind of nodding off or not engaged the way, and that might prompt the presenter to then ask them a question to make sure they get back into the session.
All right. The last question then is, I'm going to let you just kind of brag on Attune just a little bit again. A couple people have asked again, what exactly does Attune do? And a couple people have asked, can you integrate, in-house AV and streaming and stuff to the Attune platform and things like that? So again, just in summary, kind of wrap up a little bit again, kind of Attune's mission, how you can help, and then I'll wrap up with kind of where we're headed for parts 2 and 3.
Yeah. Matt, you want to take that? Yeah. In terms of our mission, our goals, we're a company that actually provides event space for folks looking to conduct meetings and or training. So that's been the core of our business. We kind of grew up in the training world, and now been doing quite a bit of meetings. We found about 50% of our business roughly is meetings. So we have 8 of our own facilities that we own throughout the country, and we have a network of about 3,000 plus facilities around the world. So we'll either work with a client to use one of our facilities in the U.S., or we source facilities for our clients. So basically, think of us in the space that we have our own, but we are also a managed service, where anywhere you want to conduct an event, or you want to have a training session anywhere throughout the globe, we can find a facility or source a facility to meet those needs. The second part of that question is integrating third-party technologies into our platform. So with regards to, like, for example, our virtual capability, we can work with other virtual platforms other than Zoom, for example. So we do our best to work with what a client has as much as possible to fit that into our technology platform as well, recognizing that everyone's not kind of using the same platforms out there, and some of those are standard and approved within an organization. So we like to work as much as possible as we can with a client's technologies they already have approved or standardized on within their organizations. But really, again, getting back, event spaces and managed service for folks looking to run meetings or trainings.
Perfect. Well, again, I want to thank everyone for attending today. I know I didn't get to all the questions. There's some of them we will definitely make sure we get to, like accessibility and captioning and things like that in parts 2 and 3, as well as a few of the other ones. Again, just a reminder to everyone, we're trying to present a broad overview here with as much information about the considerations and the ways in which you execute these things from a wide audience perspective. Some people are planners that are wanting to know, how can I transition my meetings into this space? And some are venues that are saying, how can I actually build out the capacity to assist planners with that? So we're trying to serve as many audiences as we can, but appreciate the feedback. Keep the questions coming, and if people have feedback in between, you can certainly email me at joel@uniquevenues.com, and I'm happy to engage or help plan some questions for future ones. As you can see, part 2 is coming up on June 17th. We're going to talk about planning the meeting, what goes into planning the meeting. And then it's not on this slide because we've got so many events coming up, but in part 3 is on July 9th. we're actually going to execute a hybrid meeting. So we're going to have people on the ground at a couple of the Attune sites that are presenting, and we're going to use it kind of as a mock presentation space, and then talk about what it took to actually execute the event. So again, some more great content. You do have to register individually for all of those. You can find all of those out there on our resources page, which is down there at the bottom. And as you can see, we have some other stuff coming up, member group therapy tomorrow, an expert panel next week on safety, sanitation, and sustainability, which should be really interesting. And another group therapy for campus venues on the 23rd and non-campus venues on the 25th, and a planner roundtable on the 24th. And then finally, at least on this slide, a business essentials presentation on the sales process. It's the Unique Car Salesman's Guide to Selling. It's my presentation that I'm doing on June 30th. So again, just want to thank everyone for attending today. Thank you to our panelists, Jerry and Matt, for presenting today and sharing with us. Thank you to Allie for helping in chat, and Mercy for running the slide deck. And again, last call for you, if you haven't wrapped up that session evaluation, do it quickly. And if not, then we will see you at a future Unique Venues webinar. Thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.